Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And when I used to live out in western Wyoming, I had some friends there, a couple who had the exact same name. Their names are Kim and Kim. Just absolutely wonderful people, great parents, great kids, super fun. But they had the same name, right? So that gets a little bit disorienting. And you could tell them apart because Kim was the one with the gigantic, masculine, Western Marlboro Man style mustache. And then Kim was the one who didn't have a mustache. So you always knew who you were talking to. But that could be a little bit disorienting. And just as a circle of friends and in our community, you would often have to clarify, like Mr. Kim, Mrs. Kim, or something like that, because they had the same name. What are the odds, right? Each of those two people found the love of their life, and it turned out to be somebody with the exact same name. It's crazy. Likewise, when we're working through the Bible, there's certain chunks where certain names become a little bit ambiguous because it's the same name that a lot of other people had. James is certainly one of those names that anytime you talk about the New Testament and James, you have to disambiguate a little bit because there were a lot of those Jameses around. But the big one is Mary, because apparently Mary was a very, very popular name during Bible times, and indeed, because of the legacy of not just one of the Marys, but all of the Marys of the Bible, continues to be a very popular name for all of history since then. So when we get to the end of the crucifixion account in Matthew 27, and it gives us this quick rundown of the women who were witnesses there, which, we'll talk about the significance of even giving us a list or even acknowledging that women were there in just a minute, we discover that it's a whole bunch of Marys. And indeed, when we go look through the whole life of Jesus, what we discover is there's a whole bunch of Marys. So let's look at the verse here and see if we can start sorting it through. So Jesus cries out in a loud voice and gives up his spirit, and then the temple tears, and then the earth shakes, and the rocks split, and the bodies of many holy people are raised back to life, maybe immediately then, or maybe at the time of the resurrection, a couple days later, they go into the holy city, and then the centurion and those who were there guarding Jesus, they see the earthquake and all the other stuff that happens, and though they surely don't get the fullness of the meaning, they exclaim, surely he was the Son of God. Very next thing, verse 55, many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, sometimes you'll see that rendered as James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of who's who on the list of Marys here, let's just pause for a minute and reflect on the fact that Matthew includes this passage at all. Now, we can see what he's trying to do. With his whole book, right? He's trying to persuade people, pretty much Jewish people, that Jesus is the Son of God. He's the Christ. He's the Messiah. This is the one who was promised and who is to come. And you want to be a citizen of this kingdom. He's connecting the dots with all the Old Testament stuff, which means that he's being shrewd in making editorial choices in terms of phrases to specifically make this compelling to a first century Jewish audience. We know quite a bit about gender roles at this moment in history in this part of the world, and it did not benefit Matthew on a grand scale to go and acknowledge women's roles in what Jesus was doing here or to acknowledge them as witnesses. But that's what he is doing. Remember, the concept of witness is a little bit different than how we think of it now when you're talking about the first century. Witness for us can just mean anybody who saw a thing, or even the kind of religious version of witness. Like, here's a testimony, here's an account of what I've experienced or what I saw. But here, the Jewish legal system, the school of Jewish legal thought, it hinged so much on this idea of witnesses, reliable witnesses, what makes a reliable witness, how many do you need to bring a given claim. Now, there were other competing schools of thought about witnesses and even our ideas about subpoenas and facing your accuser. All of that comes from Roman law, a little bit from Hammurabi, the ancient Babylonian to the east. So lots of people had lots of opinions, but Jewish law, particularly civil law and penal law would have centered around the idea of, can you produce the witnesses or can you not? Remember, we saw the importance of that in terms of the hoops, even if they were farces of hoops. But in terms of the hoops that the religious leaders are trying to jump through in the kangaroo court sequence with Jesus a couple pages back here at the end of 26, when they're bringing in all these witnesses and the witnesses are saying stuff and the leaders who are effectively bringing them in just to lie. They're like, nah, no, not you, no. Bring in another set of liars. No, that's not a good enough set of two witnesses there. But finally, they get the right two witnesses who phrase it the right way in their own words. And they're like, there we go. We can run with that one. And it leads to the joke conviction that they managed to get in this situation. So then, a chapter later in Matthew 27, we've got the concept of witnesses. Again, seems like a long ways apart, the stuff in 26 at the end and the stuff here getting toward the end of 27, because of how long it's taken us to unpack 27, because there's just so very, very, very much here. But it's not that far apart when you just read the thing. And Jesus' crucifixion is indeed bookended by witnesses. People who on paper were the right kind of witnesses, born with the right genitals, who looked the right way and were willing to say the right things. But then on the back end of Jesus' crucifixion, we've got another set of witnesses listed. And these, they don't say anything. They just stand there and they observe and they watch. And later, they were more than willing to give testimony. Surely Matthew consulted them about their testimony and was telling others, hey, you can go talk to these witnesses. They saw it. This second list of witnesses that Matthew is giving us on the other side of the crucifixion, these are the more reliable witnesses. Remember, Jesus said back at the end of chapter 12 that the people who were really a part of the new family of faith were the ones who did the will of his Father. There's no real reference to, well, if you're a dude, obviously then like you kind of have the inside track. Well, if you're Jewish, you obviously have the inside track here. None of that is present. His only qualifier is, I'll tell you who my brother, sister, mother is. It's the one who does the will of my Father. Well, Matthew is holding out one set of witnesses as being dishonest, false witnesses, even though on paper they looked reliable. And this other set of witnesses, he's holding them out as, even though on paper they look like not the kind of people you would want to listen to for something this important, he's holding them out as being reliable, as being faithful, as being the ones who do the will of his Father. And further, he's holding them out as being in some ways superior in their faithfulness and their boldness to the majority of the disciples. Where's Peter right now? He's not on the list. He traveled with Jesus from Galilee too. He saw all the same stuff, even more than these women saw, but they're still there, taking the risk right there in the crowd, associating with him. And lest we think for a minute that Matthew is just casually using the word witness the way we might use the word witness, and that what he really means here is just, somebody who saw it. No, look what he's doing structurally here. He's saying witness as a throwing down of the gauntlet, an invitation for you to fact check him as a member of the original audience regarding all of this crucifixion stuff. Think about it. He just said some people came back to life. You could go check with them. They went into the holy city. Go find out if that happened or not. I dare you. Then he talks about the centurion. Go find out. You can find out who was on duty, original audience. Go ask around, see if indeed they did say that he is the Son of God. You see the way he's giving people specific witnesses to these events, things they can go and check for themselves. And then here he's saying there were a bunch of women who were there in support of Jesus who didn't bail on him when everybody else did. And for whatever reason, he chooses to list three of them. Mary Magdalene, who is easily identified because she comes up quite a bit more than really most of the disciples, I guess, in terms of number of mentions, depending on how you count the mentions. Like do you count it as how often her name appears in a given scene? Each scene counts as one mention. If you count it that way, I think Mary Magdalene rivals Mary, mother of Jesus, in terms of number of scenes in which she gets a mention. Mary obviously factors theologically much more heavily, gets much more dialogue. We hear from her. We know her heart. She's the much more prominent character. But in terms of raw appearances, Mary Magdalene crops up a lot across the Gospels. So she's pretty prominent. You could go and track her down, as we'll see when we get into more specifics tomorrow, given the time as I look at it here. She was somebody whose name was probably pretty well known and probably someone who had quite a bit in terms of resources, making her that much more a reliable witness as somebody who people who are skeptical of the idea of a female witness would have had to acknowledge, she's a person of means. She's a business owner. She's vested. She can't just make stuff up. It would be ruinous for what she's doing. Mary, mother of James and Joseph. We'll talk about this tomorrow, but some people think that's Mary, mother of Jesus. Other people look at that and think we're talking about yet another Mary. It does seem a little bit odd that Mary, mother of Jesus, would get such a strange passing mention here. But again, more time for that tomorrow. And then finally, the mother of Zebedee's sons. Well, if this second Mary isn't Mary, mother of Jesus, maybe this is another woman who had inherited a husband's wealth or was a manager of things or a very vested person in society. And it looks like Zebedee was somebody who was fairly well off and owned businesses and would have had a reputation as well. So maybe Matthew is imagining that this woman, the mother of James and John, would also be a person whose vouch would be very valuable. I think that's a valid theory considering how much Matthew seems to be leaning into the contrast here on either side of the crucifixion between unreliable witnesses who look like the right kind of people on paper and reliable witnesses who look like the wrong kind of people on paper. And I promised at the beginning by talking about the delightful Kim and Kim power couple that we were going to deal with disambiguation of some similar names today. Ultimately, we will get into said disambiguation mañana. And it's going to be fun because these are really great stories about these ladies, and they'll help you and I, as readers, appreciate why their vouch does matter so much and what the story is behind that vouch. And I'm looking forward to getting into it. With that, I bid you adieu until tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.